Welcome, listeners, to this episode of Listening to America with Clay Jenkinson. My name is Nolan Johnson. I am the producer and editor of the program. On today's show, we have a special lunch table conversation with Professor Robert DeMott, one of the leading experts and Steinbeck scholars. Clay and Russ Eagle got to sit down while they were fly fishing in Montana, while Clay is out on the Lewis and Clark Trail, for this special discussion where they learned about Professor DeMott's early education, what got him into Steinbeck originally, and even got him to pick his favorite of the novels by John Steinbeck. We pick up this conversation as they were talking about his early days in college, headed down the road of becoming a Steinbeck scholar.
I went to Assumption College. It's now Assumption University, and it was strongly indebted to the Kennedy family. So the death of JFK was particularly meaningful for us because his family was heavily endowed in our college.
I know you're a literature scholar, but you're also a humanities scholar, but not a formal historian. How pivotal do you think the Kennedy assassination is in American life? I mean, some people say it's the loss of innocence.
No, I agree with that. I think that's absolutely true. And he had his flaws, and those have come out certainly in the past. But there was something about an optimistic worldview that he represented. I think that was profound for my generation. I was just out of high school, first couple of years of college, so all those intellectual and political and cultural ideals he sort of came into seemed sacred in a certain way, and they somehow got nipped in the bud at a time when it didn't seem right. It shouldn't have happened.
The other thing that really strikes me is you have a BA from Kent State, 1965, an MA 1967, and your doctorate, your PhD in 1969. You were there just a few months before the thing that happened at Kent State.
Yeah, I was. I didn't go to Kent State as an undergraduate. I went to Assumption College in Worcester, Massachusetts. Graduated in 65. I went there to play hockey. I couldn't get into graduate school anywhere, but I finally, through the back door and the help of a remarkably understanding professor I was taking an MA class at Fairfield University, and he got me into John Carroll. I did my MA there, and then when I finished that, I had a choice of going to a number of different graduate PhD programs in English. So I found myself in that year and really knew that's what I wanted to do. And the reason I went to Kent State was because, as I mentioned earlier, I had read The Trying Out of Moby Dick by Howard Vincent. I thought I wanted to work with him. He was at Kent State, which is what I did. And I went there for a couple of years. But the year after, when I graduated, I went to Ohio University, and that was marked by another cataclysmic psychic experience in my life within just a few years between Kennedy's death and then there were the shootings at Kent State, my alma mater, my PhD alma mater.
Must have been haunting to you.
It was because what happened was that every state university in Ohio was sort of mobilized. So I can remember that it was I'd only been there since September, so that early May, myself and several other of us who had just come in that year as assistant professors went down and spent the night. Literally, we were there all night at the Green talking to students and trying to make sense of what was happening. We spoke over the microphones and so on and so on. The interesting thing to me, I never got over, was there were people at those gatherings who I had never seen before and never saw since. So whether they were coming in as agitators, we just didn't know.
Provocateurs may be coming. That was the allegation about the Nixon
absolutely, yeah, absolutely, right, yeah. So it was an odd thing, and I can remember I had a friend of mine who had grown up with, and he graduated from Yale, went in the Navy. And I hooked up with him again after not having seen him for several years. And he was telling me he wanted to go to graduate school. And I said, well, you should think about, you want to go in creative writing. I said, well, we have a terrific creative writing program at Ohio University. So you should think about applying and coming out and visiting me. And so that weekend, he showed up. So we went down. I said, come, we have to go down. I have to go down to the campus and hang around. And we went down and we stood there watching things. And that's when the tear gas started. Local Athens police were tear gassing everybody. So, and then after about the 8th or 9th, the university closed down. All the universities in Ohio closed down.
And
So
many across the United States.
and it followed.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And-
So then we had this thing where we had to, I was teaching, I never forgot this, I was teaching a class on the beat writers.
on the beach.
And I had 50 students in my class. They all got a free pass. I mean, at the end, they said, everybody gets to go home. You get, instead of giving grades, if they were doing all right in the class, you gave them a PR. That meant they were passing. And that's how we resolved
No
that.
finals.
Yeah, no finals. Yeah, that's how, which would really fit in a beat literature class, certainly. Yeah.
Take the Greyhound home.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Well, there's so much to talk about, and I would love to go farther and farther with this, but it strikes me as so interesting that you had this Kent State connection, and Athens is not that far from Kent,
no, absolutely.
and you were under almost a siege during those
Right,
days,
absolutely right.
and they're amongst the most iconic days in the history of America during our time.
Yeah, right.
So amazing. But of course, we really want to talk about Steinbeck, and Russ is here champing at the bit. So let me just ask one
Let's do it. Go ahead.
to set up Russ. How'd you go from writing your doctoral dissertation on Henry David Thoreau to John Steinbeck?
Well, I had done, as an undergraduate at Assumption College, in order to graduate, you had to have a foreign language. I took German. And then you had to pass comprehensive exams. And then you had to have a thesis, write a thesis. I had no clue what I would ever write about. And this is a story I've told many times, including in Steinbeck's Imaginarium. I had a couple of young American literature professors who kind of took me under their wing. And one of them said to me, I had this dilemma. I went to him and I said, I got to write a thesis. And I didn't have a clue what to do. He said, you might like to read John Steinbeck. What I didn't realize at the time was he was telling me that this is right up your alley, kid. Just right about your speed. So I had
Really? You think he thought Steinbeck's accessible even to you?
I think even to me, I could get a handle on it, but it wasn't James Joyce or Ezra Pound, or Faulkner. So I had, there's a little preface to this. I had a very checkered career as an undergraduate. I got suspended once. At the end of my junior year, all 6 of us got letters from the dean of students, letters to our parents. And the letter said, we think it's in the best interest of the student body of Assumption College that your son not be allowed to live on campus next year.
Ever again.
Yeah, my senior year, which is what we wanted. Yes, great. Anyway, so I moved off campus, had a roommate. I got in the car, this is in October 1964, on my way to hockey practice. I went up to the library, Assumption Library, walked up to the stacks, looked for some books by Steinbeck. I pulled out Travels with Charlie. I'd never heard of it. Pulled it out. I sat on the floor. I was thumbing through it. It was the first time in my life as an English major I'd ever encountered something in a book that I had actually experienced, and that was Hurricane Donna. So he starts Travels with Charlie talking about Hurricane Donna coming off the East Coast. He was in Sag Harbor, which is at the eastern end of Long Island Sound. I grew up in Norwalk, Connecticut, on the north shore of Long Island Sound, which was literally right across the Sound. And I can remember clearly when Hurricane Donna came across an enormous amount of damage in my hometown. I had relatives who were displaced. And I read that and I said, this is the first time I've been reading Chaucer's England and Joyce's Dublin and Eliot's London, Dickens's England. And I'd never read anything that touched me in a way that I understood the geography and the experience. That's how it started. So I did this terrible thesis. I burned every copy I had. It was awful. I didn't know what I was doing. But long story short, I ended up in graduate school through the back door. I was at Kent State. There was a man there named Tetsumura Ted Hayashi, who had started a thing called the Steinbeck Society. And by the grapevine, he found out that I had written this thesis on Steinbeck. And he came to me one day and he said, I need some help on starting this thing called the Steinbeck newsletter. And I didn't really know very much. And I said, well, sure, I'd be happy to help you. That's how it started. So one thing led to another. Now, you asked me about Thoreau. The first public presentation I gave on Steinbeck was a presentation I gave at Oregon State in, I think it was April 1970. Dick Astro, who became a major Steinbeck scholar, was teaching there, and he put on a Steinbeck conference, invited Ted, and on Ted's coattails, I was invited as well. I wrote a paper about the creative process in Sweet Thursday. It was a cheat job all the way because I borrowed all of the junk I had done on Thoreau's my dissertation, which was on Thoreau's creative process. And I thought, well, I'll just shift it over here to Steinbeck.
Change a few names?
Just change a few names and do a little prestidigitation. And that's what I did. I wrote this piece on the making of, it was called I can't even remember. It was called
First Manifesto.
The first manifesto to end the bring down against Sweet Thursday. And that was a title I borrowed from Allen Ginsberg. And that was, so I gave this presentation to about 700 people in the audience. It was amazing. Jack Benson was there, a number of other people. Peter Liska, all these major people. Jack became major. And as it was over, and I thought this is probably the last thing I'll ever write on Steinbeck. And Peter Liska came up to me afterwards, and he said, that was fantastic stuff. He said, keep at it. And that was kind of a tap on the shoulder, okay, kid, you did all right.
Hey, we have to take a break. Okay. So interesting.
Anyway, that's where it got started.
On the Madison River, south of Ennis, about 30 miles north of the park, Yellowstone National Park, America's first national park. Among your books, Steinbeck's Reading, 1984, Journal of the Novel Working Days, 1989, Intro to the Grapes of Wrath, a very distinguished introduction, 2006. You also edited the 4 volumes of the Library of America on Steinbeck, a huge and major achievement in textual editing, and then Steinbeck's Typewriter, 1996, plus innumerable articles. We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Professor DeMott in just a moment. Welcome back to this very special edition of Listening to America. I've been following the Lewis and Clark Trail all across the country. Yesterday, Russ and Liz and I went to the source of the Missouri River just up the road here. Yep. There are several sources, but the utmost source is just up Red Rock Lake Pass. You've probably been up there.
Yeah, I have. I fished over there.
Yeah, and so amazing place. There's a little sign that says this is the one that's farthest from the Gulf of Mexico. And they're going back tomorrow to North Carolina, but I'm going on to Dillon and Lemhi Paths, which is what Lewis thought was the source of the Missouri. And then I'm going to get on the Clearwater, the Snake, the Columbia, go all the way to Astoria. So the Madison River is an important tributary, one of the 3 main branches. And it strikes me as really odd that Meriwether Lewis would name rivers in Montana after cabinet members of the Jefferson administration. Imagine if you tried that today.
Yeah, exactly. Look what's happening now.
Which cabinet? Well, they're all in prison, right? Anyway, Russ, you have been waiting for a long time. When I got to see you last year in Athens, I told Russ, I'm going to get to meet Robert DeMott. He said, Robert DeMott, he's the guy. And so we've been waiting for a long time for this moment. So Russ, take it.
Well, it's interesting that we're here in Montana on a Lewis and Clark trip. There's been all this talk about the journals. I know you were at the American Philosophical Society with the actual journals just recently.
Held the journals of Lewis and Clark.
And we held the White House Journal last year in Chicago. Steinbeck was a big journalist, and Dr. DeMott, you played a key role in bringing one of those journals to the public. Working Days, the Journals of the Grapes of Wrath, but it was published finally in what date?
1989.
1989. So it's sort of an odd story about how that came to be.
I was in 84 and 85. I took a leave of absence from Ohio University and I went to direct the Steinbeck Center at San Jose State. And during the time there, I had done much archival work on Steinbeck. I had spent on grant money from the Ohio University. I spent a week at the Humanities Resource Center at Austin. One of the things that made a difference in my career as a Steinbeck scholar was this. In 1975 or 76, the Steinbeck Studies Group, gave a panel presentation at the Modern Language Association meeting in New York. I think it was 75. And there were three of us. I gave a talk on To a God Unknown, which was relatively neglected at the time. That wasn't very important. What was important was that Elaine Steinbeck and Elizabeth Otis came to that meeting because it was in New York, and they sat in the front row. When all the panel, I don't even remember who the other, I can find out, I can't remember now, but myself and three other people, we got done with our presentations, and the thing broke up. Somebody had asked me a question about To a God Unknown. I gave an answer, I don't remember what it was. And after it was over, Elaine came up to me, I'd never met her before, and she said, I want you to know that's what John would have said. I said, well, I was very flattered.
Right.
And then she introduced me to Elizabeth Otis, and they asked me what I was doing. And I told them I was trying to go to all these archives around the country. I had planned to, and so on. And she said, well, let me help you with that. And so I had a letter from Elizabeth Otis, and I still have it. It's dated 1976. And it says, Professor DeMott has the right to Xerox or copy any primary Steinbeck item in your archive, whatever it was. And that was an absolute breakthrough, because up until that time, they were very, very, very guarded about letting people, Xerox copy material by Stein, original material. And that made all the difference, because what I was able to do, when I went to Texas, there were 5,000 pages of unpublished material. And I thought, I'd be here a year going through it. But with that letter in hand, I could look at something. At the end, I had a stack of material. So I would take it home. I did it at Stanford. I did it at Texas. I did it at the Pierpont Morgan Library. I did all these places. I ended up with an archive of unpublished material in my study at home. And so one of the things I discovered when I was at Texas was this manuscript, typescript, of a journal that he had kept when he was writing The Grapes of Wrath. So I told Elizabeth Otis about it. Her chief staff person then was a woman named Julie Fallowfield. And she said, Bob, we think this is a great idea. Let's try to pursue it with Viking. But when can you get it done? And I said, well, hold on a minute. The 50th anniversary of the novel is coming out in a couple of years. I said, let's not shoot our wad. Let's wait and try to organize. And that's what happened. So it gave me, even after I left San Jose State, I'm back in OU, it gave me a couple of years to be able to do a lot of that historical background and so on.
And there's a very poignant letter he wrote, I think, about 1950 to Cavici, where he found this and almost threw it away.
Absolutely,
and then said, no, I reread it, and I realized there's stories here.
That's right. That's right. So you kind of pointed the way to having this.
I've heard you make the comment that was something interesting about Steinbeck, is that he would write 2 books to write one.
He did it with East of Eden. He did it with The Grapes of Wrath. The Wayward Bus. And that's a very revealing journal, but it's never been published.
Well, if you read through, there is a sometime over the years in the Steinbeck Review, or one of its iterations, there is a great article about the manuscript that points out a lot of those things. So it's great to track the page count. There's 1,200 words and it looks cramped, and over here he's up to 1,800 words per page.
Right. Roy Simmons did some fabulous work on it.
That's who I'm talking about, yes.
He was great. Just wonderful. He was a British scholar, but extremely generous. There were a group of us when we. This was interesting, always interesting to me. I had done work on Hemingway. I had done work on Ezra Pound. I mean, in the sense of going to conferences, giving presentations, and so on. The most congenial academic group I was ever associated with were the Steinbeck people. Jack Benson, John Ditsky, Roy Simmons, Lou Owens, Susan, all these people, and we all shared our work with each other. And Roy was unstinting in that. He was just always, I'd hear from him all the time. We'd just change ideas. Oh, do you know about this? Blah, 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 blah. It was very unusual for, that kind of camaraderie among an academic group to do it. But they were just wonderful people. They're dearly missed, believe me. Yeah.
You published 3 books on Steinbeck. The first one is Steinbeck's Reading. And even though it's impossible to find a copy, you have made it available. I think it's at the San Jose State Center. That's essentially a list of every book that you were able to determine Steinbeck owned or read or referred to, quoted from.
It was. As I mentioned earlier before we got going, I worked on that book for 13 years, not every single day, but piecemeal. And I think I ended up with about 1,000. It wasn't just the listing of the books. It was the trying to verify that he owned it in his library or had underlined it or signed it. But in addition, I tried to find any quotation he might have made about the book. So it's an annotated list, and it kind of gives use your term before, kind of an archaeology of his literate mind, I guess you could say. And it was a lot of fun to work on. I enjoyed it because I kept turning up these things. And again, I was sort of motivated by the fact that Steinbeck was much more like Melville in the sense that he often read to write. And that was not a view of him that was widely believed in or accepted back in the day.
There's a great...
I can't, by the way, I only have one copy of that book.
You can't buy your own book.
And I cannot afford it. And they sell for between $500 and $600. I know where there's a copy, but I can't afford it. So.
Yes, I can remember being so happy when I discovered that on the PDF form.
Yeah, exactly. That was one of the reasons why I hooked up with the Steinbeck Center. So if you can put this on your website, it's free to all. That's fine.
I don't think this is too far in the weeds, Clay, but there's
I'll be the judge of that.
There's a great entry near the end of the Grapes of Wrath journal where Steinbeck seems to almost be hallucinating, and he feels like Tom Joad has entered the room. And he sort of, I don't know, once he regains control, he said, okay, now I have the energy to finish.
Tom. Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable thing. Almost hallucinatory, at the end, and which I guess adds to that, that sort of dreamy quality at the end of the novel. Anyway,
Right.
But yeah, that was pretty remarkable moment when the Steinbeck, the writer, gets visited by the character, major character. Right.
And the Grapes of Wrath journal is far different from the East of Eden journal. Mm-hmm. I get the feeling, he knew when he was writing the East of Eden journal that maybe someday we might be reading that. But
a little sense of posterity.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
But the manuscripts differ as much as the journal. I mean, that's something you talk about the archive at the University of Texas. There's that manuscript that Steinbeck wrote and presented in the box to Cavici, but then there's folder after folder of additions and entire pages marked out, as opposed to the Grapes of Wrath journal, which is just stunning to look at.
Right. Well, I think there was no question in my mind that he was on his top of his game when he wrote the Grapes of Wrath. There's only one place in the Grapes of Wrath manuscript. By the way, I don't know if you know this or not, but some company has brought out it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
If you look at it, and there's only a couple places where he went back and added something. I think it was like a couple paragraphs. Everything else was just like automatic, Kerouacian automatic writing. It's just amazing. And it's not the case with East of Eden. There's a lot of side ways and changes of mind. Yeah.
Just to give you a little bit of sense of Russ, I was able to take him to UVA's special collections to look at the manuscript. Great. And the curator was very learned and knew a lot. And then Russ had this typewritten set of questions and said, "Now, can you turn to page blah, blah, blah?" And the guy turned to it, and that was where the Noah piece where he had to kill off Noah. Right. And the guy said, "I never knew that." Yeah, you're teaching me. I had.
Great. That's great. Yeah. It's good stuff.
But then he says, I know it wasn't him. And I think I can go on now. In fact, I feel stronger. Funny where the energy comes from.
Yeah, it's great. It was great.
These are like invaluable, these documents. Like you're seeing the creative process of a major artistic figure as he's ruminating and things are happening and it gets into this almost hallucinatory. It's amazing to watch because we don't have that with John Milton. We don't have that with Shakespeare. We don't have that with John Keats.
Yeah, right. And we have it less and less now because of, digital. Digital is not the right word, but fewer and fewer people are probably keeping journals in order, doing their correspondence on email and rather than autographed letters, so on and so on. But yeah, no, it's a remarkable thing. And also the other thing about it is that I did my work when, Foucauldian deconstruction, continental theory was all the rage. Foucault said that, you couldn't trust the archive, that kind of thing. I thought that was utter bullshit. No, I mean, the archive can't answer all the questions, but it can open doors that otherwise would never have opened without their presence. And to me, that was the thing. They were springboards into other ways of thinking about the way Steinbeck wrote, or how he thought about writing, or characters, and so on and so on, and his process, which was always in some ways very fraught. There were always other, contextual, dimensional things happening at any given moment. And the remarkable thing to me about him as a writer, he'd get all that crap, got into the journal, and then when his mind was clear, he turned to the main text and went for it. So
I'm glad to say that we're 36 minutes into this, and it's the first time we've heard the word Foucault. Or it said Derrida.
I planned it that way.
There are great little subplots in his journal too, like to have the right color and reflection on his desk, or to fix the pencil sharpener.
Pencil sharpener.
Radel machine at the Joyous Guard.
Right. And these threads, the search for the perfect pencil, the perfect number of pencils to sharpen each day. You laugh out loud a lot when you read his journals, and
I think he had a wonderful self-deprecating sense of humor in a lot of ways. I mean, to me, it was summed up when somebody said, Mr. Steinbeck, do you think you deserve the Nobel Prize? He said, well, frankly, no. Or I can think of other people who deserve it. And it was just a remarkable moment of humility, I guess you could say.
It's sad, too, in a certain way, right? For a major author of this sort to say, maybe not. I maybe deserve the Nobel Prize.
Right. Absolutely true.
Let me ask you a question while he looks, and we'll close out this section. So, the rap on Steinbeck is that he's clumsy, that there's a sort of mediocrity in him, that is there's some of the plots are contrived, etc. So the rap on Steinbeck. And you mentioned that a little bit in the first segment of this program, but you don't believe that, do you? You don't really think that he's like a middle school author.
Well, he is in some ways. I mean, that's not quite the right way to say it. His books, some of the books who have become standards in middle school, of Mice and Men or The Red Pony and so on, there's a niche there, but there's so much more to Steinbeck than that. Even those books give you levels and he always said this, when he wrote The Grapes of Wrath, he said, there are 5 levels of The Grapes of Wrath. That's probably true of every one of his books. I think he was he wasn't a sophisticated technician the way Faulkner was, or an existential philosopher the way Hemingway was. And those writers were the ones who determined the theoretical approach modernist critics would take toward American literature. And in that regard, Steinbeck, who had never gone to study in Paris or, go abroad, sort of got hemmed into a certain way of being thought of, and I think it was unfair. And I think that's changed in recent years. I mean, I think
played a role in rehabilitating his reputation a big role.
Well, I don't know. I couldn't say. I wanted to do what I could, to help out. I mean, because I never quite believed all that stuff. I started off, one of the driving things I had when I started working on Steinbeck was I had one little mantra, and that was Steinbeck was a better writer than he was ever given credit for. And that was my simple little touchstone that I try to stay with all along. And I think over the years, over the decades, that's probably come to be considered to be acceptable now, I think. And nobody can make up a list of the 5 or 10 greatest novels in American history and leave The Grapes of Wrath off it.
Top 5 or top 10, do you think?
Top 5.
Me too.
Top 5, absolutely.
Did you name a few or higher?
Moby Dick.
Huck Finn.
Huck Finn, very, very controversial. Uncle Tom's Cabin, certainly. Scarlet Letter, they'd be up there, Absalom, or Miss Son of Fury. I mean, once you get started, you immediately go past 5, don't you? But I'd put The Grapes of Wrath.
How about Hemingway? Anything in Hemingway, top 5?
Oh, to me, it's In Our Time, the stories.
Right.
And I know other people feel more strongly about the novels, but that was a groundbreaker to me.
We need to take a short break. We're having a fascinating conversation with the great Robert DeMott at his fishing lair in southwestern Montana near Ennis. We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be back with Professor DeMott in just a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to this special edition of Listening to America. Been looking forward to this for a long time. I had the honor of interviewing Robert DeMott in his own home in Athens, Ohio, a year ago. We've been trying to set up a time when Russ and Liz could come and see you here. We spent the last day and a half on the Madison River. Extraordinarily beautiful stream and a great trout fishing stream. How many years have you been out here trout fishing?
This is my 36th year in a row.
Oh, my. So, Russ, back to you.
And in addition to the Steinbeck work, you do have at least one book I know on fly fishing.
Two. Yep.
2. I know Angling Days is one of them.
And A Stream is a collection of original essays by American writers on fly fishing.
Well, since in the last segment we got into rating novels, what's your top Steinbeck book?
It changes every year. I can tell you the ones I can't answer that. The Grapes of Wrath would be number 1. I think Cannery Row would be second for me. I think it's an absolutely fabulous book. And it's one of those books that more people need to know about. And then East of Eden, which I have great fondness for. Sea of Cortez. Those would be my 4 absolute tops.
What is special about Cannery Row for you?
It has a kind of a formal playfulness that I think was that was always inherent in Steinbeck, but he really gave it free rein. The chapters and the interchapters, it has this wonderful sense of camaraderie, and yet underneath it, there's this enormous sense of the darkness of any given life, no matter where it might be, and that sense of how ecology is more than just a scientific concept. It's a conceptual notion in the book about a relationship of people to their environment. It's a remarkably prophetic book, I think, and beautifully written. There's just no question in my mind. Just terrific book.
And that was sort of a big part of the philosophers that Steinbeck and Ricketts followed. It was essentially, you are who you're with, where you're with. I think Grapes of Wrath and Sea of Cortez and Cannery Row, to me, they sort of fit together as a sort of ecological trilogy.
Absolutely.
People love to talk about Steinbeck's trilogies. Right. I think that's one that gets overlooked.
I think absolutely right. And I think that, and by the way, I've said this many times, that the Sea of Cortez was, to me, is just a remarkable book. That he could write that book, to me, it was just stunning. Just absolutely stunning. I mean, it would be like any one of us deciding we're going to write a book about heart surgery, So, I hung around a doctor's office for a week, and now I can write about heart surgery, and that he would be able to go from that kind of engaged novelistic mindset to writing about this whole other entity. Was just remarkable. I think it's just remarkable. It's a great book, just a terrific book, and I think many of Steinbeck's books, it's still not as well known as it should be. I think, right. But it's foundational. It's absolutely foundational to so much of not only of his work, but also of where we are in terms of the way we think about ecology now, or environmental literacy.
And like the Grapes of Wrath, like Cannery Row, it was written under somewhat difficult circumstances.
Indeed it was, yeah.
Steinbeck seemed to...
He said, I remember, I never forgot this. One time at an academic conference, I can't even remember where I was, and I was on a panel. And one of the panelists was Joseph Waldmeier, who was an Americanist. And he had been a Fulbright scholar in Copenhagen when Steinbeck had been on a USAID trip. And Steinbeck had come to Waldmeier's class at one of the universities, I can't remember which one. And he wrote a little piece about it. And someone asked him, what book are you, of your own books? And he said, Sea of Cortez. Yeah. And that, I always thought that was absolutely on the nose. I would have, if I had, even after having done The Grapes of Wrath, if I had written Sea of Cortez, and I would have thought, by God, there's a damn good piece of work. Yeah, because it was just out of his comfort zone in a lot of ways, So terrific stuff.
And Steinbeck, I guess, sort of prided himself on not repeating himself. That probably contributes greatly to this idea people had that his career sort of...
Oh, yeah. They wanted him to write The Grapes of Wrath over and over and
right.
over again. Yeah. And he didn't. Now, if you look at that period from, say, 1940 to 1945, he wrote 4 or 5 different books, ending up with Cannery Row, and every one of them was different. Bombs Away, and the Moon is Down. I mean, it's just all different stuff. Yeah.
I think even if his career did make a turn south, I think that peak occurred at least at Cannery Row.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I agree.
I don't think there was any lessening of quality before that.
I think he tired out. As things went on, I think that's par for the course. I was very, very close friends with Jim Harrison, who, published 40 books, and we were friends for 20 years. And toward the end, not the poetry, but the novels tended to be somewhat repetitive. They tended to have similar kind of, not necessarily themes, but similar kind of characters and so on and so on. But I think it happens. How much have you got to say in a 40-year writing life?
And I know Clay has written and talked a lot about Travels with Charlie in recent years. But if you read the Cavici letters at the University of Texas during that period, Travels with Charlie was a challenge. He struggled to write that book.
It was. I agree. With that book, you can't tell what actually took place and what was remembered or made up after the fact. So no, I agree. But again, in one sense, that doesn't necessarily surprise me because Steinbeck primarily was a novelist. So he relied on his fiction making faculty, to kind of get him out of the hole. But
if this was a grail quest to find his creative energies again, it didn't work.
Right. That's
and
right.
so you can feel the self-disappointment in the book.
Right.
Yeah, but I do think the book does give an accurate feel of the trip.
It's remarkable to me. It's probably one of the most popular books. And I think, in other words, he, as usual with him, he found some way to strike a chord that resonated in people, whether you see it as being actually factual or nowadays we all think of it as being kind of a fictional memoir, or a fictive memoir. But it struck chords, no question about it. And still does.
When it was just a few years old. You first
I did, yeah. It had come out in 1961, and I read it for the first time in the fall of 1964. This is only 3 years old at the time. The other thing I didn't mention earlier was, besides the fact that Hurricane Donna, I had dogs, so I immediately was attracted to it.
Yes, he made up some stuff, and yes, his memory was going back many years, and some of this obviously is embellished and so on. But that doesn't degrade the authenticity of the book, does it?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that there's I don't know how to say this, but as soon as you put pen to paper, I'm using this as a metaphor, or you type the first words on a piece of paper or on your screen, you already are entering a symbolic landscape. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, as soon as you make that momentary scratch, so to speak, you're already in a world that's determined by language rather than pure memory. So, and sometimes you reflect that experience accurately. Sometimes, as you get farther and farther away from it, it becomes somewhat hazy, and you become fictive. You make up, something that fits that new symbolic landscape that you're creating. I think that was Steinbeck's deal. I think on that anyway.
Yeah, he and Ricketts often talked about a true thing, and that wasn't necessarily factual.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And most novelists will say that. Yeah, certainly. And as a poet, as a writer myself, certainly there's a moment sometimes at which you start off with an idea, and all of a sudden, and Kate will verify this in her own work, but all of a sudden something takes over in the process of writing, and it becomes something that you didn't envision to begin with. But your part of your contract with the work is that you're duty bound to follow it out. You want to see where it goes, But
what you said a minute ago is just as reminds me of the beginning of chapter 2 in Cannery Row. The word is a symbol and a delight which sucks up men and scenes. Then the thing becomes the word, and back to thing again, but warped and woven into a fantastic pattern.
Right, absolutely. Right.
Working on the Gospel of John.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's true. That's as close to what would you say? A kind of an operative, theoretical, literary key as you could ever get in Steinbeck. And there it is. That's one of the reasons I love that book, because it has that self-reflexive quality to it. You think about Steinbeck's made his reputation on this sort of objective, removed distance between himself and whatever the characters are on the subject. And he broke it in that book, which I think is one of the wonderful things. That's the great moment of postmodernism in a lot of ways,
And you mentioned Warren French earlier. I think the first book on Steinbeck that I ever found in a library was his book from the Twain series.
Right.
And I still think he's written the best essay about the inner chapters in Cannery Row and the relationship to the narrative. I think that's something.
What's to find intercalary chapters?
Well, those moments you have, let's take the Grapes of Wrath. You have the moments of the narrative of the Jodes, and that carries the weight of the travels in the book. And then alternating with that are these kind of non-fictional interchapters in which some element of the contemporary culture is being discussed by Steinbeck. That juxtapositional structure is one that I think was very congenial to him. It's in The Grapes of Wrath, obviously. It's in East of Eden. It's in Cannery Row in a certain way, And I think I think the two the narrative and then the expositional had a tendency to talk to each other or strike up a conversation in his work. And I think it's very fruitful. So
where did he get it? Dos Passos?
Maybe Dos Passos. He was very influenced by Dos Passos. The other one that he, I think, particularly in terms of The Grapes of Wrath, the other thing I think he was influenced. There were many influences, but one of them was Pere Lorentz's The Plow That Broke the Plains.
You knew Lorenz.
I did. I was, this is odd. I was working on The Grapes of Wrath. I had a research assistant who actually was one of Kate's best friends. She was a graduate student at OU at the time. And we were trying to find Pere Lorentz. And we thought he was dead. And one day, I never forgot, she came into my office. She said, I found Pere Lorentz. So we immediately got in touch with him. He was wonderful, wonderful, generous guy. So we ended up one time, Kate and I we were out visiting my parents in Connecticut, and Lorentz had lived on this enormous estate. So that's the first time I actually met him. And he was just the dearest guy. He was just very friendly. And here was a guy who was there with Steinbeck at the making of The Grapes of Wrath. Steinbeck showed him sections of the draft. And all the stuff I got from Lorentz, the letters we exchanged and so on, I all donated it all to the FDR Library in Hyde Park,
Just for those who don't know, Pere Lorentz was a documentary filmmaker, among other things. He produced two of the great documentaries ever.
The father of American
River, and
documentaries.
the other was The Plow That Broke the Plains, and they're absolutely magnificent. He worked with Steinbeck in Mexico.
Right.
So they had a great...
He's also sort of a character in the Working Days Journal.
Yes, yeah.
Steinbeck's always waiting for him to get there.
Steinbeck was very impressed by Pere Lorentz, and he was concerned what his reactions to things would be. Yeah, he was terrific. That was one of the, in an academic life, you don't get much excitement like that, but that was fun. That's a fun thing. Yeah.
And I think there's a letter actually where at one point he told Elizabeth Otis, if I'm going to make films, they're going to be with Lorentz.
Absolutely, yeah. You think about how many movies have been remade to no end that you can, put your finger on. The Grapes of Wrath has never been remade, and I hope it never is. Although there was some discussion in recent years about wanting to do it over. But
I think Spielberg was considered.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think all the legal stuff in the Steinbeck family stopped that from happening.
I hope that was true. Yeah, right. Because some classics shouldn't be screwed with. Is my theory.
Right. I think they were looking at remakes of East of Eden and Grapes of Wrath.
Right.
And when Steinbeck's widow died, needless to say, there was a long, protracted legal battle that tied a lot of his work up for a while.
That's right. Yeah, and a lot of it had to do with the demands of the sons. I never quite understood all that, but I knew Tom pretty well. I met Johnny a couple of times, so I think they were. On one hand, I can understand their feelings because they were pretty well written out. Which struck me as being extremely unfair, but beyond that, I know there were all kinds of inner machinations that were hard that most of us will never know about, I guess.
It seemed unnecessary, too. There was so much there.
Yeah, exactly.
You've spent 50 years at this, Steinbeck. You've written about that, about your life as a Steinbeck reader, a Steinbeck scholar, a Steinbeck interpreter. How do you conclude what you've done? You've
probably what I said before. I still stand by that. I think what motivated me all those years was he was a better writer than he was ever given credit for, and so I tried to do as much as possible to try to make that people aware of that by writing about various elements of it. I think. I look at it now and I feel like that was somebody else who did all that work, because I've gone on, I've done other things and deeply invested in other things as well. But I'm happy if it changed people's minds about Steinbeck as a writer, and I think he's come more and more into the pantheon of major writers of that area, at least in some of his books are. That's all you can say, But I'm pleased that the library, the 4 volumes of the Library of America, have done well. They've sold, I think, over 300,000 copies over the years. And no, I didn't get any of that, but you sign a contract, you get some money up front. But to me, the important thing was that it got those words out to a vast reading audience, and I think that was, that's part of what you say when you want to give something back, So
plus, the Library of America is like the ultimate imprimatur, that you are a major person in the canon.
It is, and it's a great publishing forum. It's nonprofit. And those editions are just fabulous. They're just beautifully prepared. They're exquisitely done. They're uniform, and they represent some of the best literary and philosophical thinking that America's ever done.
We've had the great joy of talking with Robert DeMott and Russ Eagle, 2 lovers of John Steinbeck, the third behind the camera here, and we're so thrilled to be here. We'll see you all next week for another important edition of Listening to America.